Hey there, bibliophiles. Let's break it down. Today we have Linda Hamilton, a fiction author known for The Fourth Wife, a psychological suspense novel that engages with themes tied to Latter day Saint or LDS culture. In her book, you explore secrets, identity, and the silent horror within not only marriage but community. Hey Linda, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm a huge fan of The Fourth Wife, and I was just wicked excited when you said yes.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, for listeners that have not yet read The Fourth Wife, could you let them know what it's about?
Absolutely. So my elevator pitch for The Fourth Wife is it is a gothic horror set in 1882 Utah about Mormon polygamists living in a haunted house.
And I know Haunted House is such a huge staple in the horror community, so I bet people are even more excited now.
Oh yes, I love gothic books. They're like my absolute favorite genre to read and to write. And so I if people like gothic and they like like gothic tropes, they're going to find a lot of them.
I agree. I agree. It serves. It serves. And, I feel like typically I ask what's your inspiration behind the book, but you kind of lay everything out in your author's note without giving too much away. How did The Fourth Wife come to be?
So I was born and raised Mormon. Um, Mormon heritage and like pioneers, ancestors, Mormon family is like a huge, huge part of cultural and doctrinal Mormonism. And so I was really raised on stories of my ancestors, stories on, like my religious forebears. And I always really loved those aspects of church history. I found it so fascinating. And since I'm a huge history nerd, it just like sort of went all together for me. And when I started writing, years ago, I decided I wanted to write about Mormon polygamy, which is the practice of a man having multiple wives, which was something that the Mormon church practiced in the 19th century and was very much a part of my upbringing. Talking about polygamy, the possibility of polygamy existing in the next life, all sorts of stuff I could go on about if you want more details. But basically, I wanted to talk about polygamy and I wanted to look at my own ancestors. And when I looked at my own polygamous ancestors, I discovered that there was just so little information about the women. Very few of them used their voice, or if they did use their own voice, they actually completely ignored their own marriages in their recollections, which I think now in retrospect was trauma, just pure trauma. They're not going to talk about it because it was so damaging. And so I really wanted to give a voice to these women. I wanted to explore what polygamy was actually like because when you are a Mormon kid, yes, you grow up and you hear about polygamy, but it's very much like, oh, polygamy was hard, but everyone was faithful and we don't talk about it anymore. Because nobody wants to talk about the real nitty gritty on the ground polygamy and how it was actually lived. And so I did started doing research for it and I realized like this book is a horror book because this is terrifying. All of these things I'm discovering, all of this reality. And it was actually one of the big catalysts for like my own personal faith deconstruction journey, which went really hand in hand with The Fourth Wife. And when you read it, I think you'll see that through, especially like the main character, her faith and deconstruction journey that is happening throughout the pages as she learns more about her own like polygamous world.
Yeah, and I think it's no spoiler here that Hazel is the fourth wife. But, you know, for the LDS church, the I would want to say the oldest wife, but the first wife, there's that air of, supremacy almost potentially. So can you kind of walk listeners through that are unaware? What would it really mean to be a fourth wife?
So, polygamy, one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that polygamy was very hierarchical. And I think that's because it was very patriarchal. Like polygamy as a system is very different than something than, say, polyamory, right? Which is the idea of multiple being in a marriage or in a relationship together and it's very consensual. Polygamy, or at very least, I'm going to just speak from Mormon polygamy because that's what I'm talking about. For Mormon polygamy, it's patriarchal. It is created by men for men. Everything revolves around the men. Polygamy at its heart is a literal doctrine for Mormon men to become gods in the next life, and women and children populate their literal celestial kingdoms. This is actually the very core deep doctrine of polygamy and of Mormonism. And so in reality, when polygamy was practiced in the 19th century, the first wife generally is going to be the head of the women, basically. This comes from a very loosely practiced part of polygamy that was called the Law of Sarah, which is the idea that if a man wants to take another wife, he has to ask his first wife for permission. However, the scripture that lays this law out says that if she doesn't agree, he can do it anyways because she'll be condemned. So it's sort of like a fake sense of consent, and a lot of women felt pressure to give consent or didn't give consent and he did it anyways. And so what would end up happening a lot of times is that the first wife then is going to be the one who controls all the resources. She controls, who does what jobs and, where women live. She just generally has a lot more say because she is the legal wife, the first wife. She's the one who's legally married to him. And generally, the one that was with him the longest, especially if they joined Mormonism early and then started practicing polygamy years later. Sometimes the wife that was had the most children could become kind of the top of the chain. Other times men just had favorites and those favorites would become the top of the chain. But basically, Mormon polygamy was not this utopic, everybody working together in this lovely household kind of thing. Maybe some families ran like that, but the vast majority, there's jealousies, there's hierarchies, there's someone in charge, there's someone getting more resources than the other, there's poverty, all of these issues. And when I wrote The Fourth Wife, I really wanted that to be captured. And you see the hierarchy of the wives, you see the personality of each wife and how each relates to polygamy very differently. And I did that on purpose. I want each wife to kind of represent a different take on polygamy. And you see that also in how Jacob, the husband, treats his different wives and the hierarchy that he gives to them.
Yeah, and I got goosebumps while you were talking because I didn't know about the technically should ask the first wife, but, she really has her arm twisted because you have a quote in the book that says, "Is there ever truly a choice to be had when the threat of eternal damnation is the only other possibility?" And, I highlighted that because that meant so much to me because I think that's really true in a lot of Christian traditional values. I was personally raised Catholic. I'm very inquisitive and, as I was getting older, after being told oh, this is the body and blood of Christ, and I'm like, but isn't that cannibalism? You kind of get your hand slapped a little bit for thinking that way, but it's there's the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, and in both ways, it's almost like it's a control a little bit, and sometimes an extreme bit. And I think, to your point, I exceptionally loved all of the wives because they were so different and forcing them to kind of cohabitate in this space, sharing the same husband. It was a wide variety of perspectives. Sometimes I feel like some characters can get repetitive or they're very similar. That is not the case in The Fourth Wife. I really did love that part about it.
Thank you.
Besides the Mormonism polygamy, what aspects of LDS life that you feel like were the most important to represent accurately?
So The book takes place in 1882 Utah, which any good historian is going to tell you, you know, 1880 Mormonism is going to look at least a little different than present day Mormonism. And one of the things that I think is really powerful about historical fiction and why I love to read it and love to write it is because I think that when we look at the history, we can see a lot of similar patterns to our own day and find, roots of why we act the way we act, if that makes sense. And so when I was studying, 19th century Mormonism, I discovered that a lot of it is actually very similar, there's lots of similarities to modern day Mormonism. And so in writing the book, one of the things I'm trying to confront in general is the concept of a patriarchal religion and a religion that is built around men and obedience over, choosing your own voice, as you said in that quote, which is one of my absolute favorite quotes from the book. So thank you for highlighting that. And I think it speaks to a lot of people. And like you said, a lot of religions. This is not just a Mormonism thing at all. And so polygamy, isn't practiced in modern day Mormonism on earth. That's a whole that's a whole other thing. Um, but like these concepts of obedience, the concept of a man being the head of a household, presiding over his wife and his children, the concept of godhood in Mormonism. And this is like a deep cut. So hopefully people can follow me. I think those who are familiar with Mormonism probably picked up on this a lot. Mormonism at its core creates an eternity and an eternal life that is incredibly male centric. And for women who are willing to recognize it, because not every Mormon woman is, she, like, if you look very surface level, it's just like, oh, we're all happy together in heaven forever. But when you actually really look at the doctrine, it's all about men and it's all about women revolving around men. And so I really wanted to interrogate this concept of eternity maybe not being a heaven for women, eternity being something that wasn't actually built for women. And one of the horrors that comes up in The Fourth Wife is this concept that Hazel kind of realizes of, even if she leaves her husband, even if she dies, even if he dies, she is still stuck with him for eternity within her belief system. So marriage gets kind of turned on its head of being an actual, like, a nightmare that literally never ends. Polygamy does not stop with death. Your suffering does not end. You continue to be polygamous in the next life, and it multiplies in how women, the abilities that women have in the next life, according to Mormonism, versus the abilities that men have.
Yeah, and I, especially in the beginning, as we got to know Hazel, I kind of felt like I thought she was very relatable. And even when I finished the book, like I thought to myself, especially in the very beginning, before we confront all of the horrors, like is she shaped by genuine faith or obligation? And I've kind of struggled with that internally because I can see glimpses of her where it is genuine belief, but it's also very like from the get-go, you see it in her own household and the mothers in her household and obedience to them and her aunt. So I go back and forth on that one. I'm not sure.
And I think that that's kind of on purpose, right? Because as a religion, when you grow up in a fundamentalist Christian religion where obedience is put at such a high priority, it's hard to parse that out. It's hard to figure out how many of your decisions did you make because you genuinely believed it or because you knew that that was the right option and that was the right answer.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen like the Keep Sweet and Obey documentaries too, because what I found extremely scary to me was, when you're growing up, you're told, like, be a good wife, like, take care of your husband, take care of your children. And then when they gave their accounts of their actual weddings, and then the things that they were just in no way, shape, or form prepared for, um, it's just such a disservice. It's just a horrible thing, like, to hear their accounts. And so, because I had seen that before, I had watched, like, I kind of felt like that might happen with Hazel. I was afraid that would happen for her. But I feel like it's kind of a story where time and time again, it's like we promote getting married, we promote having children, we promote obeying the faith, we promote obeying your husband. But then like you're kind of potentially forced in a bad situation and you have no tools at your disposal to make it better. Because it's just supposed to be good. You're never going to have an issue, but then you have issues.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the biggest issues with polygamy is that polygamy at its core lacks true consent. That even if a woman says yes, does she actually know what she's saying yes to? How much has she been coerced? How much has she been trained since childhood to believe that she must do this or she will be damned? And that theme of how much is polygamy consensual starts from the very beginning of polygamy. Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, started practicing polygamy in 1841 in secret. Polygamy was a secret practice for the first like decade of its practice. It was not something that was openly taught. It was not something that everybody did. It was a pretty poorly kept secret because rumors flew and eventually Joseph Smith died partially because of polygamy. But anything that has to start in secret, if you can't tell your own wife that you've been married to 20 other women, is it really
Mm-hmm.
godly? Is that really what God
Mm-hmm.
wants you to do? And I see parallels to modern day, just general Christian women and the concept of marriage. I think about Turning Point USA very recently did their women's conference or whatever it was, and they had all those women come up on the stand and be like, get married young and have more children than you can afford. And as someone who was actually taught that as well, in the 90s and early 2000s and did that, initially got married very young and started popping out babies before we even graduated college. Uh, you don't know what you are like the level of consent is very low. The level of like actual understanding of what you're doing is no, no. It worked out well. Me and my husband have made it through, but I feel like we are more the exception than the rule.
Yeah, and I think too, obviously individual cases, but even me, I was taught my entire life, like, get married, have children, etc. And it's this natural thing, and it's a blessing. It's a blessing. It's something to love. And like, I really struggled with my pregnancy. Like don't get me wrong, I love my daughter to death, but I didn't enjoy being pregnant. I was miserable from like day one. And I think it's one of those like, you kind of get shamed for it. And Christian culture right now, like, well, this is a blessing from God. How could you ever? And it's like, I do think she's amazing. I think she's a miracle. But at the same time, like, can we be a little real here? It's hard. And I think there's a level of control, but I think there's also a level of fear where they don't want us talking about that because it might scare women from not having children.
Right? Right? And I mean, I think it's so true, right? I had a very similar experience. I have four children, and being pregnant was the worst. Like I same thing. I love my children. I couldn't imagine my life without them. But at the same time, I realized that I can acknowledge that that was a choice and a sacrifice that I made purely out of religious indoctrination and devotion. I had four children because I felt that God would like hate me if I did not get to the number four for some reason. Four was kind of like the popular Mormon number when we got married. When my mom was having kids, it was six. So
Oh my God.
like I feel like there's kind of like general trends in Mormonism of like how many kids like average people have in a generation and yeah. But I don't know, like that's very real.
It
And
is. It is.
and Hazel And I wanted to capture that in Hazel. There's so many times where she makes choices that it's like, yes, she made that choice, but does she actually really want to do it? Does she
Right.
really want to do it? And so at the end, when she kind of has that final, like, feeling of like, actually, maybe I never chose any of these things. What I can see from like the highlights that people make on like the Kindle, I can see kind of like the popular highlights.
Ooh.
I think those lines are really speaking to people. I think that theme of deconstruction is hitting people.
Yeah, I mean, when I read that, when it started to like piece together, like I was just, waving my imaginary hat in the air. I'm like, get on, girl, get on out of there. Like, I don't care if you gotta claw your way, lose a nail, like, the governor's daughter in the bottom of the well in Silence of the Lambs. Like, you gotta get out of there. But I do think that, I also think that's why the trad wife horror genre is so popular right now because it's just this promotion of traditional values. And don't get me wrong, like, I think if a couple comes together and the wife wants to stay at home and care for her children, I have no qualms with that whatsoever. But I also want children to be in an environment that's healthy. I want children to be in an environment that's stable. I know plenty of people that grew up not that way, and there's devastating effects. And I also think that for these religions that tout how a man is supposed to be the provider and the man will make sure everything's okay, to tell your followers, like, just have more, even if you can't afford it, there's public assistance. Like, there's just so much illogical thought there that I cannot reconcile myself and I don't understand.
Yeah, and polygamy is like trad wife culture times four, Like it's
Yeah.
literally like here's four trad wives married to one man. And I think it's the same thing, right? It really what it comes down to, I think, is consent and choice and individual decision. Because there's a difference between like a stay-at-home mom and a trad wife, right?
Yes.
A trad wife is doing it more out of I have to promote this one specific Christian lifestyle as opposed to this is what works for me, this is what I want, this is what works for my family, like this is the decision we've made.
But the
It's
crazy thing is, if you ask some of them, they will say it's my choice because I believe my faith tells me to. And it's just, we're not really that far off from the 1800s to now of what are your convictions personally and how does that align with your faith instead of those being one and the same thing.
yeah. I mean I have lived this life. I was the Mormon trad wife that after baby number 3 I was like I am gonna do something really bad if I stay in this house another day. Like I was not built for this life. I was purely doing it because I felt so much pressure, and that pressure turned to like conviction and testimony. I don't know how else to describe it. Like you put so much pressure on yourself to the point where you're like, this is what God wants me to do, and I'm gonna do it no matter what, I don't know how else
And
to
you know what's
describe it.
I think it's like in these faiths, women suffer for God, but then you have another quote that men lie for God. He called it lying for the Lord. And like that quote, oh my God, it just hit me all over.
That is such a Mormon, that's actually a Mormon phrase, lying for the Lord. It's like a historical thing, like the concept that it's okay for prophets to maybe lie a little if it's lying for the Lord.
No, I just thought you were being cheeky. Are you serious?
Yeah. Joseph Smith. So one of Joseph Smith's like famous letters that he wrote to, it was written to a woman that he was trying to court to become one of his secret plural wives, and she initially rejected him, and he wrote this letter that said basically like that which is wrong in one instance may actually be morally right in another if I/God says so.
But could you imagine the balls on her to turn him down? Like,
She was awesome. Martha Brothers
that is
was,
pretty.
although that letter was answering. But yes, there are some women who did turn down Joseph Smith, and we know their stories because they published them. And then Joseph Smith like slut shamed them and was like, "No, Nancy Reagan's a whore." Like, it was pretty bad.
Oh my God. There's
Early
another.
early Mormon polygamy is absolutely wild, and maybe I will write about that someday when I get really brave. But writing about 1882 polygamy in itself is was a whole experience. All
Yeah,
the
because,
emotions you go through, I went through all those emotions too.
well, I
Readers
bet,
may
and then
do a
some.
lot of like, what is happening? And I'll be like, yes, sorry, this is what happened.
Well, there's another horror book that has like a female character, and she's like, "What if I was a man? Like, if I had the audacity of a man, like, there would be blood at my feet." And like, I feel like this is just an example of like, he just said, like, this would be great for me, and like, let me lie when it's possible and when it works, and let's just see how this kind of rolls out. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah. My next book has a lot of themes of those, like, if I was a man, like,
Next book.
yeah, I'm happy to tell you guys about it if you would like to know.
I would be thrilled to know. Like, I'm getting sweaty now too. I don't have another layer underneath, but let's go, Linda.
So my next book, I just turned in the copy edits for, so we should have a cover. I'm gonna like formally announce it with a cover and everything this summer. So you listeners, podcast listeners, get early dibs on knowing about it. But this is a book that is set in kind of like the same historical world. It's in Mormon history, but it's actually right before Mormonism is founded. And this book is called The Glass Looker. Glass Looker. And it's about a woman by the name of Sally Chase. Sally Chase was a seer in 1820s New York, and she could find missing objects. She would dig for treasure. There was a lot of folk belief that there was buried treasure in the earth. And one day around 1820, a young boy by the name of Joseph Smith comes to her and asks her to teach him how to use seer stones. And so she became Joseph Smith's like magical tutor. And so the book is following Sally Chase, and it's very adventurous. It's very witchy. It's less like straight horror. There are horror elements, but it's definitely more speculative, witchy, female ragey, and it's about this seer and how she's trying to carve out a space for herself as a woman, while men like Joseph Smith, who ultimately betrays her, are trying to discredit and take her place.
My God, it's like Joseph Smith found his Rasputin to show him all their ways. That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's all based in real history. And Mormonism is founded from Joseph Smith looking in magic seer stones and digging up treasure. If you love this concept of digging for treasure and using magic to try to release it from the earth, it's wild. It's wild and it's so fun.
God, I'm adding this to my list of like books to stock on NetGalley. Though, when the moment
Yeah,
it drops, I can get an advanced reader's copy. I'm sold. Like
clearly.
I had a friend that compared to like people that are raised in more traditional Christian beliefs. Like a lot of us become horror fans. It's a growing trend, I'm realizing. I don't know if it's like the millennial Christian background horror fan, but it's hitting strong lately.
I think it's because horror is a way to dissect and break down trauma. I'm a nerd. I am a grad student working on my master's in history, and I actually just presented a paper on some very, very initial early stages research that I'm doing about the concept of Mormon Gothic and like legends, ghosts, these kind of like spooky things that happen in Mormon history and how they demonstrate like this is a way for us to basically deal with foundational violence and trauma in a way that we can actually handle it. I think that's true for Americans across the spectrum, right? Like how do we deal with a lot of the horrors of like, for instance, like plantations. We make up a lot of ghost stories.
Mm.
there's a lot of ghost stories and lore around these kind of things. I think because it's easier for us to deal with this like horrific trauma than, like this is the way we're breaking it down, if that makes sense.
No, I completely agree. And I think it gives us an explainable, whether it be real or tangible, but it gives us an explanation instead of just constantly thinking, why? Is it me? Is it them? Is it, just constantly being questioning ourselves in anxiety. It's like, oh, well, it's this, it's that. And I think to your credit, that's how we help cope with these things that we cannot emotionally digest in one sitting.
Yeah. I think horror
Well,
is a really great genre, and I'm a big fan. So, and future books, I have more books planned that I'm pitching and working on, and they're all still in this like horror-ish area. So,
oh my God, I'm so fed. Thank you. I'm so excited. I'm so excited because I also think, I mean, obviously, and I haven't watched it, but like Sister Wives and Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, like Mormonism's become like a big topic lately, but I kind of feel like some of it is a little joking, and while people are talking about it, they're not getting a true understanding, like if they read The Fourth Wife, of some of the horrors behind closed doors. So I always love a good understanding of a different religion than my own.
I think that's definitely one of the double-edged swords of like Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, for instance, which, by the way, I have watched and I love,
Ooh.
because it is, uh, to me, it is such a fascinating display of Mormonism, modern day Mormonism. And all these things were like, why are these women drinking? Why are they cheating on spouses? Like all this stuff. And I'll be like, this is all Utah Mormon culture. Like, you don't understand. Like this is all rooted in Mormonism, so much of it. And so like I always have a field day watching it because I'm like, I can see so much. My husband and I watching like that first season, we're like screaming at the TV. But anyways, so you get kind of like that like jokey, weird cultural side, and then you get what's actually underlying it. And so I think a big theme on Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, for instance, to the women or to anyone who has watched it, the women on the show, whether they realize it or not, and I think they're kind of starting to realize it more, but in like the very first season, they are very patriarchal. The way they defer to their husbands, the way they defer to just men in general is really interesting. And that is very Mormon. Like you'll see the way, if you ever watch the show in like some of the, in like the early seasons, they'll be having like their cat fight or whatever with one of the women, and then they're like, well, we need to go get confirmation from the man. Right. And it's like on the surface value, you're not thinking, oh, they just want to, it's spreading the drama or whatever. But really, they have to go get the confirmation from the man, and then the deference that they show him, even if it's the jerk husband that they're trying to confront for being a jerk, they still show him a level of deference that is just ingrained within you in Mormonism.
Okay, now I'm gonna have to watch because at first I was like, "There's no way like the Mormon Church like approves of this." Like,
They
there's
don't.
just okay,
They hate
because
it.
I was like, it has to be like people that are living on like the fringe and not really like. But now I'm gonna have to watch it because I'm sold now, and that way I can understand.
That's the real secret of the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives is that
They're more
Mormons
Mormon than they think.
Mormons live this way and they don't want to admit it. Mormons live all kinds of ways, and the deep roots that exist from things like patriarchy, obedience, polygamy, especially, those don't go away. There is real generational trauma and generational harm in Mormonism, very specifically from polygamy. That's one of the things I write about a lot in like my blogging and things is just I talk about polygamy. I always say everything is polygamy. I kind of took John Green's like, John Green has his everything is tuberculosis. I say everything is polygamy.
No, but
Because
I think
everything in Mormonism somehow comes back to, oh, it's polygamy. That's the issue.
right, and I think too the way you said it in your author's note and kind of talking about like the different dynamics, like If y'all have read The Fourth Wife and you haven't read Linda's author's note, can you please take your copy off your bookshelf? You just like did yourself not a great service there because it takes in consideration how, yes, it's patriarchal and like men are exhibiting control, but the way they just pitting women against each other for like no freaking reason but entertainment. It gives like Coliseum vibes of like, why would you put women in these situations where you know there's going to be friction? You know it's not going to work out at the end, but you just can't be bothered to care and you're what, bored? Like, I don't understand.
Again, very Secret Lives of Mormon, right? Like, let's pit all the Mormon women against each other and see what happens. Yeah, uh, polygamy, polygamy really did a number on Mormonism. And I think, and I know the church, the modern day church, tries so hard to distance itself from there. And I just don't think, even if on the surface level it's distanced, it's not there. Doctrinally, it's not there in the culture. It just all lives on and keeps boiling, which is why I'm like, we have to talk about it. It's part of why I wrote The Fourth Wife. I'm like, we have to talk about this really. If we want to heal, we have to be willing to be like, our ancestors did bad things. There were things that were not godly, they're not good. This is what happened. And generally, Mormons are not willing to have that conversation.
See, and while I did read your author's note, I did have one question. Like when you sit down and you wrote the book, did you think it was more of a critique, an observation, an exploration? Like when you first set out to write this, what was the intent?
I mean, it was definitely, I wanted to explore my own religious heritage. I wanted to explore my own history. Um, I think it kind of started as like I was seeing, at the time I was writing this, which is around, 2020-ish, I'm seeing a lot of other authors like really digging into their own heritage, whatever that might be, and creating these amazing stories, utilizing that culture, utilizing their own experiences, their own religion, all of these different things. And so I was like, I want that for Mormonism. I want that for myself. There really aren't there's very, very few mainstream authors writing about Mormonism and like Mormon culture, Mormon history. And part of that is, publishing in general, I think probably doesn't need to give that big of a platform to that. But I we're also starting to see more. I just picked up an ex-Mormon's romance book, and it's all about Mormonism and like leaving Mormonism. And Libby Grant slash Olivia Hawker. She writes under both those names. She does fabulous historical fictions, and she has two that are about Mormons and polygamy. One is about Emma Smith, Joseph Smith's wife, and I think we're starting to see more of it, which is really great.
No, I agree. I agree. Because I think too, when you see religion take a step back, try to keep things quiet, try to keep these in the shadow, kind of how, polygamy wasn't really pronounced a thing in the beginning. All faiths have that. You see it in Catholicism with, they have a problem with the priest touching children. You can't deny it. It is a systemic issue that they are constantly quiet about. And I know that everyone is really happy in America to finally have an American Pope, and they're so proud about it. And I'm like, I, I'm only really going to be proud of a Pope if they address this. That to me is my, like, I can't have a conversation about Catholicism until we actually talk about the problems and heal, and you don't hide, like, there's just these pillars where universally you are a bad person if you do certain things. This is one of them. And so when things are quieted, make it shut up, make it quiet, hide it. Um, that's just a trademark of, is it really this great to be doing in the first place? Suspicious. Okay, Linda. So I also wondered, because I know when you sat down to explore your faith, I mean, one could assume because you've lived through it this was a quick write for you, but how long did it actually take you to write The Fourth Wife?
Wow, a long time. So I think I wrote the first draft in 2021. Um, and then started like sending it to agents in like 2022-ish. 2022, 2023. It's a long process. It's kind of blurred at this point. I wrote a lot of versions. I wrote a lot of versions. And I will say for anyone else out there who might be an aspiring author, don't give up because, this was the third book I queried. The other two books didn't get picked up. Hundreds of agents. I'm pretty sure when I got my agent, she was one of my very last people I queried. Like we're talking over 100 queries on the fourth wife before someone said yes. And also keep tweaking it and working on it as you're querying because that was one of the big things. Like when I first sent out the fourth wife, it did have some initial buzz and interest from agents, but it wasn't a very well written book. Like I'm just gonna be honest, it wasn't well written. And so no one wanted to take it. And so thankfully I had at least a couple agents be like, hey, if you make some changes here, we could reconsider it. And so that really helped a lot was being able to be like, okay, I need to work on it. And so then I worked on it with my agent for like another year and it sold in 2025 and then published in 2026. So it's a long process. It was a long process. I know for other authors it may not be so long, but for me it was really long. And I think it was good for me that no one picked up the first version of The Fourth Wife or that no one picked up my first two books because I think that the book that I put out was so much better than what it was at the beginning. Does that make sense?
It does, but now that you mentioned you had different versions, it's like, was the ending always the same or did you change
So
it? Ooh.
that's one of the biggest things that changed in the book. It initially was a very sad book. It had a very sad ending. And my initial beta readers were like, we can't have like this is very sad. Like they didn't like it. And so I was like, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, it's really sad. And I think it's because also like at that point I was sad, right? Like I had just finished writing this book and learned so many horrible things about my ancestors. Like I had just come face to face with so many things that were like just completely, you realize like like I can see in color now, like right, and so I was in a sad place, I think, too, with my relationship to polygamy and everything, and I just felt like this is gonna have a sad ending because it's sad. And so that changed. If you read it now, don't worry, friends, it has a happy ending with lots of vengeance. Yeah, we had vengeance added in was another thing, and yeah, the ending was very interesting, even up until the very, very end, right before we sent it to editors for submission. That was the very last thing we changed. Like my agent and I working together, because she was like, there's just something not working about the ending. And I was like, I agree, there is something not working about the ending. And so she gave me this idea, which is another tip for writers out there, and because I had never thought of this before, and so I thought it was brilliant. She had me read the book only from the perspective of each wife. So instead of reading the whole thing, I just read all of like Abigail's chapters. So I was basically reading her story. And it was really helpful for one to make sure that everything's consistent because sometimes, when you're writing a big long book, you kind of forget what you put at the beginning or whatever. But it was also really helpful for making me like make sure that everybody's arc made sense. Everybody's arc completed. And so that was kind of one of the big things was I realized that someone's arc wasn't completing right. And so when I changed that and then I sent it back to my agent, she's like, that was it. We figured it out. So that's another tip. Maybe if you feel like something's not working in your book, try reading it only from one character and see if that makes sense.
Well, and I think to your credit too, that's probably why each of the wives are so distinct in their sound and their what drives them and their personality and the way they portray themselves. Like they are very unique characters with little overlap. Probably the only overlap who they're married to.
Yeah.
But the fourth wife is a case of it very well. I'm picky with my POV books, but that well done.
Writing in other POVs is hard.
Yeah.
I drafted a book that had multiple POVs and I'm like, That is hard. Authors who write in multiple POVs, you guys are MVPs.
Yeah. Yeah.
My goal is to eventually get there and feel confident enough in my writing to do one of those because I'm like a first person girly. I even when I try to start, sometimes I'll initially start writing a book in like third person, and then by like second page, I've switched back to first. It's just the way my brain thinks about it for the characters. So,
Yeah, but even still, like, I feel like if people have, like, with Hazel, Hazel's telling us this story throughout the book, but I feel like those other characters are so stand out alone. Like, it's not just more Hazel-ish people. If so, where's the conflict? That's how, like it typically falls flat for me, but, it's a diverse band all in one household trying to figure this gothic horror out.
yes, thank you.
Okay, so second book coming out. Do you have a release date yet?
It's the end of April next year, so in 2027,
Okay,
last week,
end of
April.
April next year. Okay, stalking NetGalley. Um,
I
and
imagine
so,
it'll start going up on places like NetGalley and pre-orders and stuff. I'm guessing it'll probably be in the early fall.
okay, it's okay. I'll stalk NetGalley. Like, I don't know if it's the anxiety in me or just like the FOMO, but like I have a list of people that I constantly search NetGalley, and it's like, when's the next one coming out?
I love
Because
that.
sometimes I just miss one, and then by the time I realize it's way too late, and I'm like, oh my god, I missed it entirely. Um, but for people that have not read The Fourth Wife, not familiar with you, but now that they're like, I'm ordering The Fourth Wife now, I need more Linda, I need to stay in the know. Where can people go to follow you to stay up to date on all the exciting things coming?
The best place is Instagram or TikTok. I do love to make videos, and so I make a lot of videos. I will say I make a lot of book recommendation videos. So if you are a person who likes book recommendations, especially in horror, historical fiction, nonfiction, literary fiction, like these kind of genres, fantasy too, definitely give me a follow. It's Linda Hamilton Writer. If you're a person who's like, I would love to read more about polygamy, if that's something that interests you, you can follow me on my Substack with the same username. That's where I write my long form essays. They're basically me just ranting about about polygamy and morbidism and all sorts of fun things like that. But those are the best places to find me.
Okay. And then for horror listeners, what are your top horror recs?
So many. Um, so I absolutely adored The Reformatory. That book is so freaking scary. It is, but not like in, let me back this up. The horror that I like to read, I call it women's horror. It is horror that is written for the women, like a female gaze. I don't know how else to describe it. I don't know if this is probably a very uneducated take, but I feel like traditional horror with like men telling scary stories, I don't know, like a lot of them just don't have good female characters, or don't have a great point of view from the women. And then we have this awesome new, like more emerging in the last like decade or so, female authors writing horror, and their ability to capture so many of these horrifying things is just, and they do it in a way that isn't always like pure blood and jump scares, if that makes sense. I don't read a
Yes.
lot of like super scary, I have to keep the lights on kind of horror books. I like to read the horror books that make me go, what? That just like are so weird and are doing such a good job of breaking down structural power. And that's the real horror for women, right? And so the reformatory is about a boys like reformatory prison in the Jim Crow South. And so you get the horrors of like these ghosts, and you get the horrors of the absolutely atrocious things they were doing to these African American boys. And the way that she is calling out those problems is just so brilliantly done. So good. And that's what was scary. That's what I'll say is scary. I listened to it on audiobook and I screamed like out loud at the characters. I was like, don't go in there. But that one's really good. Victorian Psycho is a really good one. Similar vibe, similar kind of thing where it's like here is an absolutely unhinged female character doing absolutely horrible things. And I know it's coming out as like a movie.
Yes,
I'm
I
not
saw
sure
the
what.
trailer before Obsession. It looks really
Yeah,
good.
it looks so good. I'm so excited for that. Um, and then the other one I always recommend to anybody is Sylvia Moreno Garcia, any of her books. Mexican Gothic, I honestly think it is the book that launched the recent Gothic trend. It's so good. And her other book, the Bewitching, was like in my top three books I read last year. So highly, highly recommend her.
Those are some hot recommendations, Linda. All right, so for listeners, I will have all of the links that she mentioned in the description below. And while you're there, go ahead and comment your questions, feedback, like, subscribe. It helps me promote and make more of these videos. But Linda, thank you so much for your time. The Fourth Wife is so important for those that want to understand more about the LDS Church through a fictional lens. Like, I'm so grateful you wrote this book and took the time to talk about it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun to chat. I love people who are interested in my nerdy niche weird things I like polygamy.